And I think that this is the way consciousness separates out, is that, the separations basically create multiplayer games. And that's effectively what we're in, a big multiplayer game. And you will experience different people you've met throughout your different timelines.
Today's podcast is actually a re-release of my most popular podcast of all time with Robert Grant. And the reason why I'm re-releasing it is because if you listen to that episode, I messed up the audio of it badly in certain parts. And there's no way to fix it after you upload it. So, hey, I'm just taking responsibility, and I wanted to give it the most high quality podcast. And this is the way that I do that. Okay. So if you've seen this episode before, I highly recommend that you watch it again, because there's so much in it, and it's such a brilliant conversation. And there's a reason why it's my most popular of all time. And if you get bored in certain parts because it gets highly technical and mathematical at some parts, and then it's more about the spiritual, and then other parts about the consciousness, if it's not interesting to you, I highly recommend that you take a look at the chapters and find a topic that really interests you. Okay. And there it is. Here we go. Without further ado, here's Robert Grant. One of my favorite things that you're doing is looking at the secrets within art.
Yep.
Because I feel like there's not that many people doing that, and it's difficult to do. So what led you to that process, and what do you think are some of the most fascinating discoveries that you've made?
Wow. It's really cool that you're asking me this, because I don't get asked this question. So that's really, we're starting off in a really unique place. So that's awesome. I think what got me into it was not conscious. And I actually believe that, first of all, I strongly feel and believe that it's a simulation that we're basically living in. And every day that goes by is more evidence of that. And the more I say it and express that as well to other people, the more that becomes the realistic manifestation that comes into this realm, right, of existence. But I think that the reason why I started going deep into paintings, particularly the work of Leonardo da Vinci, was the night my son was born. So my son was born on 6/26 in 2019. He's 3 years old now. And while my wife was going through labor and everything, and of course we're sort of helpless. What are we supposed to do? She didn't want me have her hold her hand or whatever during the whole process during this one section. And we're actually supposed to be sleeping, but I couldn't sleep. So I started drawing, right? I started drawing out Vitruvian Man. And as I was drawing Vitruvian Man, just from memory, mind you, just from memory, I started noticing something about the way that the square was placed against the circle. And I was like, there's something significant here. So the unique part of the way Da Vinci did this was that he placed the square so that it shared the same base as the circle. Instead of placing the square at the center of the circle, he placed it at the base where they were matching. And so the square only barely crests the circle at the two upper corners of the square. And I noticed there's something there that was telling me there's something more to this. There's something more to this. So, and I said, geez, it cannot be that if I measure the angle from the center of the circle to the corner of the square, so the center of the circle, which is a different center than the square center, because the square center would be below, right, the circle center. But if I measure the angle from the center of the circle to the corner of the square, what would it tell me? And I measured it, and it was 51.85 degrees. So I was like, that's the exact same slope angle as the Great Pyramid.
Oh!
So wait a minute.
It can't be a coincidence.
What are the odds? Because first of all, this is a real problem, because if Da Vinci's going to square the circle, and by the way, if you read the book by Walter Isaacson on Da Vinci's life, he spent 10 years studying squaring the circle. So Da Vinci's a pretty smart guy. I think everybody would recognize that. Probably one of the greatest genius level people of all time. And yet, why did he choose the square he chose? Because it's nowhere close to traditional task of squaring the circle. Squaring the circle would actually have been done two ways. One would be that the square would have the same perimeter as the circumference of the circle, which would then mean that the square wouldn't even come up to the circle, right? The square would be too small. It would basically, if it shared the base, it would be just shy of even coming up to the circle on the both corners that I just mentioned. The other way would be to match the area of the square in the circle. And if you did that, then it would be much above the circle. So instead of just barely cresting the circle the way that Da Vinci did it, it is actually far above that. So you would say, if I'm a mathematician, and I would look at it and go, wait a minute, what was he trying to do here? Because he wasn't coming close to squaring the circle in either of the two prescribed methods to do it from. And, this is a problem that was an ancient problem that for thousands of years, Greek mathematicians, geometers tried to solve this problem. And they had to solve it with uniquely no measurement at all. So no measurements. You couldn't have any lines on a rule or anything. It had to just be a straight edge and a compass to do it. So how do you start with drawing a circle and then match the exact area of that circle to the square? And it's going to give you a certain proportion, but Da Vinci's proportions were totally wrong, like completely wrong. So it's kind of in between. So it's like, well, did he do a mean value of the two squares? And that's how he said, okay, I'm going to, sort of like wink, wink at all the people that for thousands of years are trying to solve this problem. He's like, I found a different way to do it. And that doesn't work either because it's not an average. And what I then decided to do is if I figured out that the circle had a radius of 1 unit, then of course its area would be pi, right? And so I thought, well, let me see if I could figure out what the value then would be correspondingly of the square based on that area measurement of the circle being pi. And it turns out to be 2.718. So 2.7182818. And I'm like, that number looks really familiar. It's the Euler number. So he matched the circle in area to a square in the Euler number, which is it's the second most important mathematical constant, arguably even more than the golden ratio.
Not that many people know about it, I feel.
No, and in fact, it wasn't even discovered as a math constant until Isaac Newton 200 years later.
Wow.
So now, wait a minute. This is deep because if I were to tell you that the speed of light is the speed limit of the universe, most people would probably agree to that, right? They'd probably say, okay, yeah, nothing is going to travel faster than the speed of light wave propagations, right? Because light doesn't actually travel. That's another thing that's important to note. Light is basically, that's the wave propagation that's traveling. So if I'm in a football stadium and I do the wave with everybody, right? Everyone does the wave. It goes up and down. I'm staying stationary. There's just an on excitation and off excitation, right? And then the wave goes around the stadium. So it's the wave that's actually traveling, not the photon. So if that's the case, right, then if there's an earthquake in Japan and you have this tsunami that comes across, are the water molecules that end up on the shores of California the ones from Japan? Or are they the same California water molecules? They're the same California water molecules. All that traveled was the wave propagation. See what I mean? So it goes up and down, on excitation, off excitation. Same thing. And we have a hard time understanding this because we rejected the notion of an ether, an etheric field, way back in Einstein's day. When we're talking about at that point in time around general relativity, special relativity, the ether was sort of tossed out as a possible concept. Exactly. You got mocked. And it's like, wait a minute, how could you have nothing there? But actually that's what it is, because a photon, then you could look at it almost like a screen, like an LED that turns on and off. When I'm playing ping pong on the screen, the light is not actually traveling. It's each LED is reflecting through the wave propagation or wave perturbation. Follow? Mm-hmm. Now, if I were to say speed limit of the universe is going to therefore of waves, all waves, right? Electromagnetic waves, gravitational waves are the same speed of light, 186,282 miles per second. Or, in kilometers, it would be 299,792 kilometers per second. Okay. But what would be the limit of the speed limit? The limit or the speed limit of the speed limit would have to be the Euler number. Why? Because all wave propagation, exponential growth, is determined by the Euler number. Now, why is it the Euler number?
That's what I was thinking.
Why do they even call it the Euler number if it was invented, or not invented, because no math is invented, rather?
Discovered.
Why was it discovered by Isaac Newton, and yet it got the name of Leonhard Euler? Well, then you have to start understanding what is the meaning of the word Euler in German, because he was a Swiss-German mathematician. Well, Euler actually means owl in German. And owls are associated with wisdom, right? And it turns out that if pi creates circles from diameters and radii, right, then you have the creation of squares from the Euler number. So, and the two work together to create a triangle. Because if I have an equilateral triangle whose sides are all pi, the height of the triangle will be approximately the Euler number. So they're working together. It's almost like they're cross-dimensional frames, though. So Da Vinci is probably arguing here that in a scalar wave, which is what the Euler number controls, gravitation, right? In a scalar wave, it is 2.718. In a the equivalence across a transverse wave is 3.14159 pi. So now you've got light waves versus longitudinal waves, so transverse waves of light versus longitudinal waves. What the hell is Da Vinci telling us here? He knew the Euler number? Like, this is like some serious advanced stuff. And when you start really digging deep into it, then you start asking the question also, why was Euler given the credit for it? Well, he wasn't really, but Euler means owl. How far, what's unique about an owl that other animals can't do?
Turn their head.
How far can they turn their head?
180, is it? Is it more than that, 270?
271.8 degrees.
I like how you have that number just memorized off the top of your head.
So
but you
wait
do
a
numbers.
minute.
That's crazy.
The Euler number is matching the Euler, the owl's head rotation. What? Does this sound kind of crazy to you?
I mean,
it sounds incredibly improbable to me, which then leads you again to go, wait a minute, what was Da Vinci trying to tell us? What was he really trying to tell us? And by the way, the masculine is represented by the square. The feminine is represented by the circle.
Why is that?
Well, I think it has to do with rationality and irrationality. So when you think about a circle, if we had a world that's only squares and straight lines and everything, it'd be kind of boring, right? Realistically.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we all can be confounded sometimes because we just don't understand the nature of emotion. Just like we don't understand the nature exactly of irrationality.
Or this reality.
So we had to have sort of this offset of rational within something that's totally irrational, inexplicable. It doesn't really make sense. Just like it's hard to logically describe an emotion, right? If you really think about it. But that's what makes the universe beautiful. It's what brings this curve, this inexplicability to our experience. It's sort of like the wild card aspect of the universe. And sometimes for a man to understand a woman can be incredibly confounding. But that's the beauty of it. So maybe instead of trying to completely understand it, we learn to accept it. We don't need to take it in through the logos, but rather take it in because each one of us, male or female, have both energies. So when I started realizing that Da Vinci had encrypted knowledge of essentially gravitation, essentially of scalar waves and the differential between scalar waves and transverse waves, all into one proportion between a square and a circle that had to be deliberately chosen to get that exact proportion that happened to also match the slope angle of the Great Pyramid, then you realize you're in a game.
Yeah. Universe of game. I came to the same type of conclusion myself. We're in some sort of game. Mm-hmm. After I saw the similarities between, I played a lot of video games growing up, and that was kind of my out from reality. I kind of wanted to escape, and I didn't really enjoy school. And I'm just going to be completely transparent with my journey with math. Mm-hmm. I failed Algebra 1. It happens. I just got to say it because just because you didn't like something, I didn't enjoy the way it was taught. I didn't like the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just not an enjoyable experience.
Yeah.
Now I'm at the point where I can sit here and it's one of the most fascinating things I have ever heard.
Isn't it amazing?
And you see the hero's journey with like, yeah, at one point it was not interesting, but then you start to look at geometry and you see that our reality is designed by it. It's not just this thing that you'll never use. If you want to know the nature of reality, at least.
Yeah.
Or the nature of the simulation, if you want to say it in that way. But you said earlier that you believe we're in a simulation.
I think it's a spiritual life simulation.
So how do you think it works? Hey, I hate to interrupt this episode, but I got to mention today's sponsor, and it's my book, 10 Secrets of Awakening. If you want to support the podcast and keep it going, this is a perfect way to do it because it actually goes along beautifully with today's episode. And it is the secrets to understanding consciousness, life transformation, and self-realization. So many of the topics we discuss here today are written extensively about in my book, and you can find 10 Secrets of Awakening on Amazon as a paperback if you want, or as an ebook if you prefer. And also you can find those links right in the description. And back to the episode. Let's go.
I think we choose it all. I believe that we choose it all. I believe we're all separations of the number one, and we're all experiencing our life paths that were also chosen, like menus. And I'm down to every detail. Nothing happens by accident. Literally not a single thing in your life happens by accident. And the experience that you have is actually just, let's say you chose a number. That number could be a gigantic number. And the experience you will have is 1 over that number, which creates a repetition cycle. And that repetition cycle is what's called a period, right? So you take a number like 7, 1 over 7 is 0.142857, and then those 6 digits keep repeating infinitely. That's the cycle, like a wave. Sine, cosine, or incarnation, reincarnation.
Or pre-choosing. We're pre-choosing.
We're pre-choosing all of it, but there's no pre because there's no time.
Yeah, that's what I was curious.
It's now choosing.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing is now. We've just created a conception of linear time, and in our conception is limited to a single arrow of time going one direction. And actually, everything is retrocausal. So that means that the future determines the past as much as the past determines the future. And you can talk about grandfather paradoxes all day long. The truth is that means time loops on itself.
Kind of like in Interstellar.
Yeah.
Where he was controlling the books and he was controlling the future.
Exactly.
He was controlling the future from the future, in a sense.
So what if you realized this at a certain stage of your life and you wanted to encrypt things to yourself through time?
That'd be how to do it, right?
Just like Interstellar. Or you could encrypt things to other people. And the way you would have to do it, encryptions through time, is you'd have to associate it with a certain level of consciousness. So you would do encryptions that would be at different levels of awareness, that it would actually force you to peel back layers of your own consciousness and then add layers in so that you would be able to comprehend and apprehend the message that was being sent to you, which is really just who you are.
So when you see the universe as outside time, tell me if this makes sense to you, because this is how I've kind of seen it. It's like if you're in a game, you're playing a game, then there's going to be game time. But then if you are not playing the game is still running. Let's say if it's like an MMO or a
multiplayer game. Yeah.
So
thanks for playing my game, Ready Player One. Right. And I think that this is the way consciousness separates out, is that, the separations basically create multiplayer games. And that's effectively what we're in, a big multiplayer game. And you will experience different people you've met throughout your different timelines. And the reason why I've come to this conclusion is I'm building such a game right now. It's in a new category called spiritual life simulation, based on Hero's Journey.
You're building a video game.
Yes, I am. One of our companies is.
Let's go.
Yeah. So, and there's a reason for doing that, because first of all, we joke internally all the time. We're like, wait, and so the way the game ends is all of us sitting at our conference room table talking about building a game. So yeah, we're definitely going
Maybe
down the
we're
rabbit
doing
hole
it-
today.
Right. Maybe we're doing that now, though. What if we're already in that game?
Well, I
On
mean,
top of a game.
it's what Kabbalists have done for thousands of years. So when a Kabbalistic rabbi gets to a certain level in his spiritual practice, he doesn't really plan for it. It just happens. He starts to make a golem. Golem is a clay man. And it's representing the symbology of God making Adam. And that God, for him to continue his expansion of consciousness, makes an avatar. Right? He breathes life into that avatar. And if you haven't seen the film on YouTube called The Maker, it's really worth watching. So basically, it's about this little clay guy who like ends up in this room and he sees this clock. It's a little Sands of Time clock. And then he's got all these, things to use and utilize. He's got some clay in there. He's got some teeth. He's got all kinds of stuff around. It's like all the pieces to build the next avatar. So in the Kabbalistic sense, in that tradition, they would build their golem and they would put a word in Hebrew at the top of his head. And there was a ceremony that they would undertake around this because this was coming closest to embodying God consciousness, becoming a creator. And so the word that was put on the top of everyone's heads was emet. So in English, I mean, that's the word in Hebrew, but also it can take on the term emit. What is the opposite or the anagram of emit?
Receive?
Time.
Maybe. Okay, I was way off.
Emit, E-M-I-T, right?
Oh, and yeah.
T-I-M-E. So you've got light emission.
Yeah.
Dark absorption. And of course, gravity is associated directly with time and time-space. So, wait, what? So the point is that maybe this whole need for mankind to now create artificial intelligence is not really artificial at all. It might just be all part of the expansion of consciousness. And there's no such thing as artificial. Intelligence is intelligence. And that's hard for people who think that the spiritual path is all about nature and connecting only to nature. But you have to realize that God's creation of the universe, and I don't believe God is some old guy, right? I believe that it's a mirror of consciousness. I believe that the entire universe is God. And what we have to do is start to abandon the notions of dualistic thinking, which basically say God is only good. We have to realize that God has created a universe that is half bad in the way that we would term good and bad. But actually, is it really bad? Is death bad? We have this long-term sort of association that death is a bad thing, but actually death is necessary for life. It's just a cycle. And maybe it's an inhalation-exhalation cycle. And then we shouldn't think so bad about it. Hindus believe that every person is born with a set number of breaths. What would be that number of breaths? Well, the number of breaths that, you could have might be associated in the Bible with the age of man. In this era, it's kind of been sort of 72 years. It's referenced many times. So 72 years. Okay, how many breaths do we take in one day? Well, the number of breaths we take in one day is going to be, because each 3 1/3 seconds is one inhalation-exhalation cycle on average. That means we take 25,920 breaths in one day, which also happens to be, because there's 86,400 seconds in a day, that's 60 times 24 times 60 again, so 24 hours times 60 minutes times 60 seconds equals 86,400. So divide that by 3 1/3, and you end up with, a 3 1/3 seconds, right? Is you end up with 25,920. Also happens to be the exact precession of equinox for the Earth's wobble. So, okay. So then if I live 72 years, right, how many breaths will I have in my lifetime? Well, the way I come to that is I have to basically figure out that 72 years has, if I use 360 days on the Egyptian calendar and the Sumerian calendar for the year, because they had like 5 makeup days, then you would end up with 25,920 times 25,920, which equals 671 million. 671 million is the speed of light in miles per hour. And that's the average number of breaths. Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It just seems all too perfect. And when you start getting detailed into the geometry and the mathematics of it, then you're like going, wait, and some of these things like our reckoning of time comes straight from the Sumerians, that there's no history book prior to them. Kind of amazing.
What do you think about the Anunnaki and the Enlil-Enki and all that?
So when you start thinking in these terms, you have to start asking yourself, is what I've considered my whole life to be the distant past also the distant future? It's kind of like if I'm on Earth and I get on an airplane and I fly around Earth and I end up, returning back to the same place. I flew over the Pacific Ocean, went over Russia and, Mongolia and all this, and then come all the way around across Europe. And then I'm now going to be over the Atlantic Ocean. I'm going to come across the United States, over New York, and then end up back in Orange County, California. I started west, but I ended up coming back from east. How is time different? Maybe, a lot of people still do believe the Earth is flat. Maybe literally I could make an argument that the whole thing is a holograph. Okay. We don't even have to be in motion. Maybe the entire thing is like a 6-foot cube that we're sitting inside of, right? We're like Wally World. And I would make a strong argument that could actually be the case. It would be indistinguishable from the reality we experience. But I think the holograph is still spherical, right? It's a spheroid.
Might be.
So
yeah,
as we come around, as I've flown around the Earth many times, and as we come around, how could this be different than time? In ancient times, you look at the horizon, you can only see 22 miles, 25 miles maybe on a clear day. And if you could see that far without having to go up a mountain somewhere to see farther, right? Because that's sort of changing your angle. If you could see only a certain distance, how could we draw that same analogy to time? Because at a certain point, we can't see the arc of the Earth unless we could actually get high up on a mountaintop somewhere. And you might start to see the arc of the Earth. It's a 7-degree arc, right? That was discovered by, I think it was Eratosthenes. But by doing this test that he did in Thebes and I think it was Memphis and Alexandria, where they basically cast a shadow across a stick and they measured the exact same time. This is, I think it was well explained by Carl Sagan.
Yeah.
But interestingly, if you couldn't see that far unless you got on top of a mountain, and even then it's really difficult to see, right? Because that skews your vision as well. Then how would you know that time actually looped back on itself? You wouldn't, because unless you live several lifetimes or could have access to several lifetimes of time, you just haven't lived long enough to experience the arc of it. What we think is flat and linear for time could actually just be a giant spheroid. Follow what I'm saying? So we just have to live more time or be able to access the time that we've already experienced to get that zoom out perspective. So as I kind of look at this and I look at the art, and back to your original question, I have found now many encryptions, many, that are seemingly impossible odds. So I'm, traditionally a very left brain thinker. So I look at this with a very skeptical eye and I'm like, how could this be? And as I go deeper and deeper, and then I combine that with knowledge and experience I've had in biology and chemistry and physics and mathematics, et cetera, across the board. And I'm like, wait a minute, how is it possible also that everybody's DNA is literally a binary code? When you just start counting the protons of the carbon, the nitrogen, the oxygen, and the hydrogen that make up nucleotide pairs, nature's counting system, it literally gives you 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 until you get into transfer RNA. Your cell replaces thymine to combine with adenine. And now you've got an offset that creates ones and zeros. Literally a binary code. I patented that. And We literally have biology that is based upon computer code.
I'm just laughing about the ridiculousness of it. So it's ridiculous because it's so obvious that there's some sort of underlying structure
Oh,
to
and
reality.
it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And so think about it. Let's say that the whole purpose of the universe is to expand consciousness. We may not even have physical bodies at all. It's just all about the expansion of awareness and self-awareness. When you're an infinite God and you could do anything, the only game that would ever make sense is to limit your abilities. It would never make sense to go the opposite direction.
Because you can't.
That's right. You'd have to put yourself, and you'd also want to make yourself forget any knowledge that you had of that. Because the real opportunity here is to learn through not didactic study, but to learn and expand awareness and consciousness, expand intelligence of the universe via experiential learning.
So you limitations.
Yeah, through limitation. And then as you realize more and more and raise consciousness, you then peel back those opaque layers of limitation so that they become transparent. And you would create a game, spiritual life simulation, where the entire aim of the exercise would be to expand your consciousness through challenging situations, impossible tasks, just like in Hero's Journey. Difficult challenges. If you like to climb mountains, you're not going to choose an easy way. Look, if you and I both knew we were going to die, but we weren't actually going to die, we'd have fun with it. We'd be like, hey, how'd you die last time? If there's no pain, right? If there's really no pain and you at least knew that whatever it was going to be temporary, then I would try to choose the most epic way to die.
Yeah.
I'd be like, yeah, I died in a ball of flames that time,
Gladiator 300.
Totally. I would choose the most epic way to go out in style, right? That's what I would choose. I don't know about you, but
yeah,
I'm not going to choose the easy way. It may be fun. It's like, I want to die having sex with the love of my life, right? That's a pretty good way to die.
Fair enough.
But you do that a few times, like, okay, I want to try something else. I want to see what it'd be like to get burned at the stake. Okay, I'm going to get burned at the stake in this life. I'm going to die, falling off a cliff this time. I'm going to be getting chased by, the sheriff of Nottingham. I've got all these list of things that I want to experience. And that the more challenging experiences you choose, right, the more strain, the bigger the gain. Athletes know that if you really want to work your muscle, you have to tear it. So what about your spiritual muscle? So you wouldn't choose the easiest of circumstances. I wouldn't.
If you knew it was a game.
If you knew it was a game and you would set it up
Some people might.
Dude, and the moment we die, we're like, man, that was so real, dude. That was crazy. Oh my God, I couldn't believe all that whacked out stuff. And when the government went nuts like that, yeah, totally. It's like, yeah, then it was a revolution. What the F, brah? That was nuts. It was so real. That's what we would do. And then the other people there that were along the game with you be like, thanks for playing my game. So I think when you start realizing this, it starts to open up a whole new world of experience for you. Because then you start thinking, wait a minute, this world around me is actually just a reflection of all my feelings. All my feelings get reflected back to me in this cyclic pattern of periodicity, this period, this 1/x value, until I learn to understand my own divinity, and then I can find my golden ratio.
So then what is your own divinity? What do you think that is?
It's your own God realization. We are all God.
Mm-hmm.
We're just separations of this unity consciousness that have placed blinders on ourselves just so we can have these experiences, so that we can see what it's like to learn empathy. It's having to first understand that what we thought was fact is not fact. It's facet. It's adding the E to the FACT. The E is the owl, the wisdom. Once we can understand that what I thought was the only reality is just one perspective on that reality. And I need to now start learning how to expand my awareness to include empathizing with everybody else's perspective, seeing it through their eyes, feeling it by walking in their shoes. And the only solution then is absolute acceptance and love, no longer judgment. We live in a construct that's built upon judgment. We would create a construct that's built. Okay, so if our game here is to learn to transcend judgment, you're going to limit yourself from being able to see that you can already transcend judgment. You're going to make it really real because it's going to be fear-based. It's going to have this environment that's going to have scarcity embedded into it because time is this clock that's always ticking. It's like playing a basketball game. There's stress just looking at the clock because it's always running out. Just like in the Maker, they flip the hourglass. It's like, whoa, as soon as they flip it, then it's like, okay, something's got to be done. We don't know what it is even, but we're running out of time. Even though time's infinite. It's theater.
It's an interesting balance to try and find within the infinite time, yet there's limitations, because I feel like a lot of people can get lost in, well, nothing matters then because it's infinite. Time never ends. So then why do I do anything? Because I'm going to exist forever. And so trying to find the beauty in limitation in I only have this much time. Therefore, I'm going to be doing other things, but this will be the only time that I do this. And that gives it some sort of meaning, because also, to go back to what you were saying earlier, if we didn't have limitations in the sense of the forgetting, then nothing would matter because we would already know the answer.
That's right.
It's kind of like if I'm playing GTA,
Mm-hmm.
just running around, often people, nothing matters because I know that I'm in a game.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like there's beauty in understanding that you don't know that you're in the game.
Yeah, there is. And also that uncovering of that moment that you do realize you are in a game of your own making, then all the times that you used to blame everybody else for all the things that happened to you or blame happenstance, you now realize it was deliberate. So instead of trying to figure out what to choose in this lifetime, it changes your perspective entirely to trying to figure out, why did I choose this?
The big one.
What was my intent behind having me experience this? Because I always thought the universe happened to me until one day I realized, no, the universe is actually happening for me. Every time I had a bad circumstance come up, I realized it was more like a test. And I realized also that if I just could find the silver lining in each of those really horrible circumstances, then maybe somehow, some way it could flip to the positive, because even our perception of time is just another perception that is polarized, past and future. That's how we tend to look at the world. So when I realized that point, then I was like, whoa, what am I trying to learn here? Why am I experiencing this? Why am I meeting this person? Why is Nick Zai coming into my life right now? It's because you are a reflection of what's going on inside of me. It's because as I go through my own awareness expansion, the people that I meet, the people I interact with, will end up mirroring and having sympathetic resonance with that frequency. Right? I was on a call this morning with a friend of mine, and I've just noticed it. I just did this interview with Queen Diambi, who's on my podcast, and she tells this incredible hero's journey story I can't wait to share with everybody. She didn't learn that she was queen of the Congo, or she was going to be queen of she was princess. She didn't even know she was princess until she was 48 years old. This is straight up like coming to America, and she lived in Boca Raton, Florida, of all places. And she was born in Belgium, but grew up in Congo, but didn't know that she was royalty because it was a negative aspect of society. There was a cancel culture that was put in place by the Belgians and King Leopold II, who had control over Belgium. Control over Belgium and control over Congo. And she tells this incredible story of her own journey, which was like this huge self-realization journey for her. But I've been thinking to myself, I'm like, geez, how did I end up so recently, like so many of my new friends are black. right? And I'm like, why? So I had to ask myself today, and I said it to one of my friends who's black, who I talked to on the phone on a Zoom call, and she's in Paris, and we're coordinating this trip to Egypt.
Coming up,
It's
isn't
coming
it?
up in
Nice.
February. And she said, yeah, I noticed you've been doing these interviews with all these like black people and everything. And I'm like, yeah, it's really strange, like how many black friends I've gotten just in the last year. And what I realized is that there's a certain aspect, right or wrong. We associate like male, female. We say, oh, the feminine is the negative charge and the masculine is the positive charge. Well, it could actually be easily the other way around. It could be that masculine is negative and feminine is positive. It's just perspective, right? And really, the way we've seen the world until now, even for myself, I had to realize I wasn't seeing the world from an objective viewpoint. It's impossible to see the world from an objective viewpoint. I see the world from my point of advantage. Not my vantage point, but my advantage point. What is, does the earth spin counterclockwise? Well, it depends. We're taught in schools that it spins counterclockwise, but actually it depends if you're looking at it from looking down on the North Pole or looking up on the South Pole. And what's up and down anyway in space? So if you're looking from the South Pole up, then it spins clockwise.
Have you ever been to the South Pole?
I have. Yeah, I had not stopped there, but I flew directly over the South Pole when I lived in Australia, and I was going to a cardiology conference in Buenos Aires, Argentina. So we flew right over the South Pole. And all the people that say, oh, you can't fly over the South Pole, it's complete bullshit. So it's another urban myth thing. I've flown over like 5 times. So, and everyone points it out. That's exactly the South Pole. I looked, I couldn't find any giant holes. But maybe it was under the ice. Who knows? But I think that the whole point here is that it's about our perspective and learning to expand our perspective. And the only way we can expand our perspective is through direct experience. It's not something you can learn in a book. It's something that has to be lived and experienced. And that's the purpose of this very, very beautiful and interesting game. And within this game, you can perceive it as a hell or a heaven.
People do.
And it will be exactly what you believe it will be. It's just like if you think you can or you think you can't, you will be right. That's why I try not to spend too much time talking about conspiracies, because when you realize that you're the architect and you're just playing out your own game, it's like the conspiracies are me too. But then you have to think even God over the whole universe, right? A higher self, if you want to call it that. It's got to be equally bad or equally opposed. Very often in spiritual text, it doesn't refer to things as good or bad. What it refer to it as the opposer, right? So there'll be the hero and the opposer. But the real journey of the hero is to self-actualize and self-transcend. That's the real journey of the hero's journey. I just did this whole exercise in making this game. We brought on this guy named Don Daglow, who is like he's a legend in Hero's Journey and integrating it into gaming architectures. He worked at Electronic Arts. He was one of the first employees there, and that was his job. He's won Emmys and everything on this. I mean, amazing story. And he started telling the story about Lord of the Rings and why Lord of the Rings is such a great example of a hero's journey. Because it always starts off with the hero gets the call, right? It's like, okay, Frodo, you got to go get the ring of Sauron, and you're going to take that ring, and everyone's going to want that, and they're going to try to kill you for it. But you've got the pure heart, and you're the only one that can do it. We're going to give it to you. You're 3.5 feet tall. Okay. There's orcs and there's all kinds of wizards that can like dwarf over you and tree people and all kinds of crazy stuff, but you're going to survive it all. But the real journey is for you to find yourself along the way. And the thing that's beautiful about the story of Frodo is that we all can relate to that vulnerability. It's like, why me, Lord? Why me, Gandalf? Why me? I'm not special. And then learning that through time, the program of the game is you were the only one that could have done it. What you did. It's beautiful, actually. It's like the most amazing thing. And then you start realizing that when you see the world as your U inverse, then you recognize that everybody you meet can be a divine message, a message from that unconscious realm. Every experience you have can be a divine symbolism. And as Carl Jung put it, it's through bringing illumination to our dark aspects of ourselves, right? So the dark aspects, so we always think of it as dark. Well, it could easily be that's the good side, right? It's just our own point of advantage, right? It's like a negative of a photograph. Is this carpet tan? Well, yes, but it's also like indigo blue. It's actually the same color as the walls, because that's the color of absorption related to that reflection. That's why the colors actually match well together. It's the same color. It's just a different reflection versus absorption orientation on it. So why all of a sudden do I get all these black friends? Well, because I'm becoming friends with I'm becoming acquainted with my own darkness. There's nothing that happens in your life that's by happenstance. And darkness isn't bad. It is your hero too. It's just as much you. And I don't believe the world is a difficult place because people hate each other. I believe the world becomes a difficult place because people hate themselves. They don't accept the other aspects of themselves, so they try to repress them. And then that's when things start getting kind of haywire. But all of it chosen by our higher self for the path of our highest benefit and good spiritually. So is what I'm saying that foreign, or actually has it already been written in thousands of years of books and scripture? Definitely the latter, because
Hermeticism talks about it.
the universe is mental.
Right.
From the very first principle, on through correspondence and
Polarities
polarity and gender and all of the different aspects, right, of the 7 Hermetic principles. But beyond that, you can look at the Bhagavad Gita, right? And you can, I'm sure you've studied a lot of these things, right? You can look at Taoist philosophy. Every one of the Eastern faiths, I would say call them more spiritual practices than religion, is based upon a notion of Maya. And Maya, Ya is a way of saying I in many languages. And then Maya, so backwards would be I am. Interesting.
It's a game.
A really cool one. But it's also a game that we can make the most of. And the beauty is there's no real mistakes. No real mistakes. But as you start to really become aware of this stuff, then you're like, well, I want to maximize the experience. I want to understand why I chose all these things. And the dots that connect throughout your entire life and existence become profound, like entirely profound. And then you find more and more encryptions that others and you have left for you to find. And they might be found in paintings or things that have been around. I mean, you have to find something that's going to last the test of time. I mean, if I encrypted something, unless I put it in stone or maybe had to put it into the architecture of something like the Great Pyramid, I'd have to find something that's going to be able to last for several hundred years or maybe thousands.
Floods, catastrophes, comets, whatever it might be.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
And it's hard to do. I think that's why we look at ancient civilizations and there's not that many remnants, because it's just hard to keep things around with all the different catastrophes
Totally.
that have happened. I think there's been humans, this is my intuition, or this is my own, what I've came to the conclusion. I think there's been humans a lot longer than we think.
Well, we keep cycling through. But, I tend to think of it like this also. Let's say we're a grasshopper, you live in a field. That field becomes your universe. You know nothing else. You know the flora, you know the fauna, the diversity that's embedded in that field.
Like Plato's cave.
Yeah, like Plato's cave. Mm-hmm. Then you die and you come back and you're a monkey in some South African or South American jungle. And you now have expanded flora and fauna diversification for you to experience. You know sloths. You know other monkeys. You know the panther. Or the leopard, all kinds of different species, all kinds of different flowers that far exceed the amount of genetic diversity available in a field for a grasshopper. But you still probably don't know that across the mountain range behind your tree home is a really cool city called Rio de Janeiro. And there's people living there, right? They would seem as alien as extraterrestrials would seem to us. Then you die again and you come back, living in Arkansas, and you're like, you've never traveled anywhere, you've never been on a plane. You have a very sheltered existence, but you do know about certain things, and you have friends that have been like fishing up in Alaska, but they talk about how blue the sky is, but you don't really know it because you've never been there. Then you die and come back again as a well-traveled, Sigma-style male who is savvy to the ways of the world, speaks several languages, and has met with all kinds of diversity, flora, fauna, intelligence, all over the world. He's met the Inuits, right? He's met the people that live in Mongolia on the Mongolian steppe. He knows their religions. He knows their philosophies. He knows their knowledge because he studied it his whole life. This is just another conscious expansion. What would have seemed entirely alien to the prior man who lived in Arkansas now seems entirely familiar.
Like there's levels.
Yeah. So then what would be the next stage? You die, that guy dies and comes back as a woman, maybe. And that woman now is going to experience a whole new realm of experience, which might include extraterrestrials. Maybe those extraterrestrials aren't even living on other planets, but they've been here all along.
Man, I wanted to know your thoughts on that. ETs.
Oh, they exist. It's just another part of the game construct. As you raise consciousness to a point, they get introduced into interstage left. And it's all about our consciousness. It's us. They've been here all along. It's just us that haven't been able to see them. Only a few people have.
Now, when you say been here, are we referring to humans that are advanced, or are you more referring to specific races of other looking?
Yes. All the above.
Have you met?
Yes. I have.
And what was that experience like?
First experience when I was 11 years old. I lived in Rendlesham Forest in England in 1980. And there's a famous UFO sighting that happened by the military in Rendlesham Forest in 1980. And my house butted up against that forest. And these were visitors that claimed to be Arcturian or future human, same thing. And it's well documented. You can actually find a lot about it. Gary Osborne wrote a book about it, and you can find a lot about it on YouTube as well. Mm-hmm. That was my first experience, but I'd forgotten a lot of it. I remembered it as soon as I then saw it again, and I was like, wait, that's where I lived. And at that exact same time, it was between Christmas and New Year's in 1980. So it happened twice, on the Boxing Day and then 2 days later, the 28th. 26th is Boxing Day. So I had that experience, and then the next major experience I had with it, where it was like direct communication, was in 2017 in Egypt. And it wasn't just me who saw it and experienced it. We were laying on the Giza Plateau after just spending the last few hours in the Great Pyramid, laying in the King's Chamber sarcophagus. And we were laying on the rocks out in front of the Great Pyramid, and we could hear the noises coming from inside the pyramid, because the pyramid is like a giant speaker. And it's a resonance chamber. And as we're laying out there, we're looking at the stars, and we're noticing the stars are moving in formations. There are about 75 of them. There are 50 of us watching it. And we saw 75 ships on top of the Giza Plateau flying in formations. And we were like, whoa, what the? It was like the craziest thing. All of us saw it. And I filmed some of it too. And unfortunately, because it was a very bright moon that night, the contrast wasn't working right. And this is before we had the latest cameras that actually do really well at night. And it didn't capture that well, but it did capture, and you could hear everyone talking about it. Everyone's like, wow, oh my gosh, I can't even believe this. I mean, and it was a pretty amazing experience. But I've had many other encounters since then, probably 20.
And do you think that they are on other planets traveling here? Or are they already here?
Yeah, they do.
They probably have.
They have in this case, the ones I've been lazing with, there's something called Council of Nine. And this Council of Nine, had 2 Arcturian members. Arcturians see themselves as like the Jedi of the galaxy. And they're actually called the Shaddai, which is pretty funny. And the Jed, like Jed Pillar, right?
So maybe George Lucas.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's. That's what I'm telling you. Art imitates life, and life imitates art. It's retrocausal.
Yeah, it's probably why you're making a game.
It is partially why I'm making a game.
Kind of express yourself and what the nature is without just saying it. Sometimes you got to show people. That's why I think the Matrix movies and some aspects of that, or even Ready Player One you mentioned, they give you aspects that maybe they're not nailing the whole thing, but they're opening us up to possibilities that some of these aspects in these movies could be.
Oh, I saw this film this morning. I reposted on my Instagram account, which was Bruce Lipton.
Mm-hmm.
Lipton basically saying The Matrix wasn't a fictional film; it was a documentary.
What do you?
Oh, I love it.
What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, do you think that there's AI that are controlling humans in that way? Because
look, even the name, Neo, and they kept referring to him as the One, right? And that's just a permutation of the word one.
Yeah.
Right. And another way to write that would be Phi, Pi, and Euler.
It's all connected.
Mm-hmm.
I heard about the Council of Nine in the Law of One.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you ever heard of the Law of One.
I have. Yep.
I used to be really into it. Then I started to realize that you lose so many people.
I didn't. When I first understood Council of Nine, I had no idea about the Law of One. I'd never read Law of One. It was just something that came as an experience directly, and they told me they were from Council of Nine. It was the first time I got that reference was in 2018 when I spent the night in the Great Pyramid.
Interesting.
By myself.
That's an experience to remember,
Oh yeah.
So, but yeah, I heard about the Law of One, and I've done hundreds of videos on it, but I haven't been talking about it as much because I think you lose so many people when you talk about channeling. And so I've been trying to expand to show there's other places, there's science behind
there
a
is.
lot of these topics.
There is. Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I think this is one of the biggest challenges. I was invited to give a speech a few weeks ago at Walter Russell's University of Science Philosophy.
They actually wanted me to come out there too. I've been trying to get out there.
Yeah, you should go. It's awesome.
Stuff.
Awesome stuff. I gave like a 3-hour lecture there.
Mm-hmm.
And I started out my lecture with saying that there's a big convergence of science, art, and spirituality. And that the world has been led to believe by ourselves, not by somebody else, but by us, right? There's only us. We've been led to believe, however, by ourselves that science and art and spirituality are 3 very separate things. Never shall they meet together in one place and converge. And actually, that's just patently false. I believe, and I strongly assert to you today, that the highest ability for us to access scientific knowledge will only be achieved through a spiritual path. And that the spiritual path likewise requires scientific knowledge, but it also requires a balance of artistic skill and knowledge. That's why squaring the circle becomes so important, because it's a meditative practice. What you're really doing is learning how to practice, whether you get it perfect or not, right? That doesn't really matter. As a meditation, I use it before I really go into my meditations or before I go into like accessing the Akashic field of like mathematics. The book I gave you is all new mathematical discovery. Entire book. 95% of it's entirely new. So how does that happen? Well, because math is only discovered, it's a language. And as we enter higher dimensions, we access new language for those dimensions, new computer language, right? And the math is that language. It's just we're looking at the numerical representation of it, but it eventually goes all the way down to binary code. Everything, literally everything does. So when you look at it in that sense, then you go, then math is like the language of the universe. And how do I learn to become an adept in communicating with the universe, which is really just my unconscious mind? How do I find my oneness? How do I find my golden ratio? My golden ratio is what brings me back to that oneness, that realization. And, these Arcturians are supreme mathematicians. I'm telling you, they are really, really into math. They laugh. They do joke about this. I mean, they're largely 6-dimensional, right? But they, some of them can be 5th dimensional. Like some are born into 5th dimension and they go into 6th dimension. And they claim that they are just future humans that basically are no longer bound by time. They've been here all along. Like a biosphere thing for them. It's another fractal of our own consciousness. So it's something that, to me, it's really difficult when someone says, well, there's no evidentiary sort of, compelling evidence of them. Although it's just because we're, again, looking at the world through our own lens of bias. There's so much pointing to extraterrestrials. It's kind of ridiculous, actually. And now, if you actually look at it, I think it's finally tipped the scales. I think more people believe in the existence of extraterrestrials. It's as soon as you move away from the notion of materialism and into mentalism.
And also, I think people struggle with how do you let go of the Christian, the faiths, not just Christian, but the faiths that will say that they're extremely negative, fallen angels, that type of thing. Because I think there's a lot of people, even very people that are out there really in the mainstream, even Jordan Peterson has that perspective where, it's very religious based. I'm not sure what his perspective is on that specific topic, but I've never seen people like him step outside and talk about these things. So what do you think the disconnect is?
Well, I think in general, this is a story as old as mankind itself. We fear what we don't know. We fear what we don't understand. That's why we fear our subconscious mind. That's why we fear what we're capable of that we don't want to admit to. And then all the things that we crave, particularly from that perspective, we then judge as negative in everybody else. And then we just keep experiencing that same experience over and over and over again. We attract everything we judge until we no longer judge what we attracted.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you think that that's playing an effect on
100%. Everything. And you can see this in your world, and it's really tied directly to your emotional state. Your emotional state will be the world that gets reflected all around you. If you're feeling an emotional position of sort of like lacking, uncertainty, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, you'll live in a world that is full of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And it's this subtle thing. And so how can you communicate with your subconscious to reprogram your perception of the conscious mind to actually live a more serene existence and experience a heaven on earth rather than a hell on earth? I think it's through understanding and learning synchronicities. Carl Jung talking about the number of synchronicities we register and experience are directly associated with our degree of ascension along this path of individuation, as he terms it. And I fundamentally believe that to be true, and I've had direct experience with it over and over and over again. I've lived a ridiculous life. I've lived an entirely ridiculous life. I'm telling you, I never thought that I would do the things I did. And it had to be so extreme that I was like, really? This can't be real. I'll give you a funny example of this. Okay, just a funny example. So when I was in, I don't know if I told this story on this before, but when I was in college, all these guys were in my dorm room at BYU, right? And I was Mormon then. I'm not Mormon anymore. But these guys are all these Mormon boys, and they're all like looking at Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. And they're all sitting in my room, and we're a cramped little room, in the dorm. Totally. It's like, there's like 2 feet between our beds. It was like tiny in this place. And these guys are all trying to act macho and everything. And they're like, so what pickup lines do you know, Robert? How would you pick up a girl? What are you going to say? Pick up a girl.
People still do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. And they were like judging each other's lame pickup lines. Right.
Yeah.
And so they're looking at 3 pictures within there. They just kept like thumbing through the page of the Sports Illustrated. They're like, oh my gosh, Kathy Ireland's so beautiful. She's so hot. And then it was Elle Macpherson. Oh my gosh, she's so hot. And it was like Cindy Crawford. Oh my gosh, she's so freaking beautiful. Like, what would I ever say to someone like this? And so they're all talking about what they would say. And they came to me, and I was kind of sitting there quietly. And I said, I don't know. My sense is if you guys are all going to say stuff like that, I would probably try to do something the exact opposite. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, because I know she's not going to really probably be attracted to you. I'm not more attractive than you guys. So I'm just going to be the one that doesn't try to pick her up, but I'll just try to sit there confidently, because if I'm timid also, then she won't even notice me. So maybe I'll just sit there confidently, and I'll be the one that doesn't ask her out. I said, I'll wait for her to come and ask me what I'm thinking or what I'm about. And
did it work though?
So I said, who knows? Maybe in my lifetime, all three of these people will actually come and approach me, and I won't have to do that. So fast forward, this is 1988. Fast forward to 1997. I now live in Sydney, Australia. I'm on Sydney Harbour Bridge, waiting in my Holden Statesman, right? I was general manager of this company in Australia, way too young to be doing that job. But again, I've lived this kind of strange, bizarre movie script life. And so I'm like, I think I was 20, I guess I was 27 at the time. And driving on the bridge, and I look at the car behind me in the rearview mirror, and everyone's waiting to go to the toll, and it's a $2 toll. And they have these $2 gold coins that are kind of thick, but small, right, in diameter, but kind of thick. And so you take the coin, you throw it in this bucket thing, and then you get to go through the bridge. So this car behind me was a really nice Jaguar. It's a beautiful Jaguar convertible, but I couldn't see who was driving it really. It looked like someone with big hair. It might have been a woman. I didn't really recognize anything. So I just kept, minding my business. And the steering wheels are on the right side, or not on the left side. And so from my left window, I hear a knock on the window. I'm like, and I look over, and it's Elle Macpherson. Elle Macpherson. Now you're thinking of the girl in the red dress on The Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
And so I look over, and it's Elle Macpherson. I roll down the window. We had electric windows back then. It's so funny. All these people that thought that 9/11 didn't really happen because people didn't have cell phones back then. I'm like, yeah, we did. And we're not. I'm like, this is really stupid, guys. I used to take calls and stuff when I was on, I remember 2001. I was on airplanes around that time. I was living in Israel also. And I could tell you, I was making calls back and forth from my cell phone from airplanes all the time illegally. And we also used to have phones in the chairs, right, on the airplanes.
Yeah.
So we had all these things. We had electric windows in 1997 also. So I look over Elle Macpherson, and she's not just standing there like next to my car. She's wearing a bikini. Her hair's all done up, and she's got this little see-through shawl on. And she's like, hello. She goes, can I borrow $2, please? And I'm like, I've got to be on candid camera here somewhere. This can't be real. This cannot be real. And I'm like, sure. Now, there's like literally hundreds of cars. And it happened to be my car. And she comes, I hand her $2. I don't think about it more. I'm like, wow, that's so crazy. I just met Elle Macpherson. She was the biggest model in the world in 1997. She was the most famous. She was everywhere. It was like, oh my gosh, I just met Elle Macpherson. So I drive to the hotel I'm going to, which is the Park Hyatt on Circular Quay in Sydney. And normally when I pull up my car, there's all these valet guys who would come out and they take my car. But this time they're not doing that because they see this Jaguar behind me. And it's got Elle Macpherson, and they knew because she was already checked in the hotel that it was her. So that no one gave a damn about me. And so they passed me and they're like, okay, yeah, we got you. We don't care. We're not going to like talk to you or anything. And they went off and talked to Elle, and Elle sees me and she's like, oh, you're the guy who gave me the $2. Thank you so much. Can I buy you a drink?
And there it is.
And I unfortunately had to say, I'm actually giving a speech here tonight to a bunch of cardiologists, a room full of cardiologists. And I said, I can't, but I would love to take a rain check or something. She says, no, we're leaving tomorrow. And I'm like, oh, that's too bad. Fast forward 24 years.
24 years.
24 years. I get a request for a podcast a few years ago, a year and a half ago, from a guy named Pete Evans from Australia. And he was the chef in Australia. He ended up getting banned on social media during the whole COVID thing. And but he had a lot of followers, like 1.5 million followers, and he's one of the casualties of that time. So I did this podcast with him, and I get an email from him about a week later saying, Elle McPherson, I copied her on this email, saw our podcast, and she wants to have a meeting with you. I'm like, really? I read down, and I see what she's written and everything. And I write back and I say, Elle, we actually met once before. I'm sure you don't remember it. I said, but it was on Sydney Harbor Bridge and you borrowed $2 from me. And she was like, oh my God, I remember that. Now, the funny part about that was on a Friday that happened. Well, it showed up. We were being followed by paparazzi, and it showed up in the Sydney Morning Herald, right? Like literally in the page 6 section where she's like standing right next to my car asking me for $2. And they're like, who's the lucky bloke? And it's my car that was there, right? I'm like, is this real? Can all these possibilities, the convergence of all these things, come on. So then I have a 2-hour call with her. We talk about spirituality. She's big time into it and everything. She lives in Florida now. And then I had a podcast with her. I did the launch of my first like IG Live series of podcasts that I used to do.
Oh, nice.
And it was great. And we became friends. So that was one. 2008, I'm president of Allergan Medical, big pharma company. And we launched Botox and Juvederm and Lap-Band and Latisse also. Latisse was getting launched that year. And I happened to get invited to George Clooney's party that he has between Christmas and New Year's. Every year, it's like this party for Mike Meldman, birthday party, and it's in Cabo. So I'm there. There's like, Leo DiCaprio, like this whole crew. It's like this brat pack, all these, like 150 people that are there. And I'm talking with Leo, and actually I was talking with Bar, his wife, because she's Israeli and I speak Hebrew. And my wife at the time was dancing with Leo. Like, no joke. This is really happening. I'm like, okay, cool. But I'm kind of all by myself because then I think Tobey Maguire, someone took off with Bar, and I'm standing there by myself.
Tobey Maguire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh,
Spider-Man guy.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Did you see the last Spider-Man?
I didn't yet.
Oh, okay.
I didn't yet. So here I am.
Hopefully it doesn't spoil anything.
Here I am. And then I notice like Cindy Crawford wearing jeans, right?
Yeah.
It was a pretty casual party, is like hovering around. And she walks over to me and she goes, hi, you're Robert Grant, right? I go, why, yes. And she goes, you have this new product called Latisse for eyelash growth. And I said, yeah. She goes, what do I have to do to become your celebrity spokesperson for this? And I was like, wait, you're Cindy Crawford, right? She's like, yes. I said, you know my name? She goes, yes. I said, you actually want something from me? She goes, yes. And I said, I'm sorry, I just need a moment to myself.
Just to process
this. So that was the second time.
Wow.
So then the last one was Kathy Ireland. 2013, I'm in my office at one of my companies I founded just down the street from here. And I get a call to my office from the front desk. The front desk girl says, there's a Kathy Ireland on the phone to talk with you. And I said, Kathy Ireland, like the model, Kathy Ireland? And she's like, yeah, I don't know. And she didn't know who Kathy Ireland was because she was much younger. And I said, put her through. Sure enough, it's Kathy Ireland. She says, I just watched your TED Talk. And she goes, I have a whole skincare product line that I would like to, sell together with you. I'd like to do a partnership with you. And I was like, all three now. So in 1988, I said to all these guys, I said, I have a feeling they're all going to end up reaching out to me. All three did. The likelihood of that happening from a mathematical probability perspective, very, very, very small.
Yeah.
Right. So I've had so many experiences throughout my life. I've survived 3 plane crashes. How do you do that?
I don't know. How did you do that? Did you jump out the plane or what happened?
The first one was Delta Flight 88. I was flying in from Singapore. We'd refueled in Alaska. We stopped in Japan. It was an MD-11 plane. And we're flying over LAX, and the landing gear won't go down. I'm looking out the window, and nobody knows. We kept hearing the landing gear trying to go down and go like this, and we're like, what the hell's going on? This is 1993. And I look out the wing, and I notice that there's fuel coming out of the wing because there's no rain outside, but there's like liquid coming off the wing. And I look down at the airport because we're like taxiing. We're going around the airport in circles, and I'm like, what is going on? And I see all these fire trucks, ambulance, they're foaming the runway. I'm like, what is going on? And they didn't tell us until the very last second, like literally right before we had impact. We're coming in for the landing, and the landing's supposed to be like this. You know, the back of the plane hits first, I think. But when you have got no front landing gear, you have to hit it nose first. And so we came in, and then right before we impacted, they're like, brace, landing. You know, basically emergency, brace positions. And we were all like, what? And I got this incredible bruise from the seatbelt. Like, it was horrible. And the plane went off the runway. It happened at LAX. You look it up. Went off the runway. We had to go out the emergency slides. And there was fire coming off the side of it and everything. It was nuts, man. Everyone screaming, the oxygen mask, the whole 9 yards. And all the lights were off in the plane. We had to go through the thing, the emergency procedures and all that. I lived through that.
So for people who are listening, and even for people like me who are doing this kind of stuff, what advice do you have to live a life to get to that point where, you know, for me, like my goal with this podcast is to be one of the number one in the world. That's my goal. I always want to be. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it the best that I can. Okay. You know, and there's a lot of people out there that whatever field that is, doesn't have to be podcasting. It can be, you know, whether they're on the spiritual path even, and they want to reach their highest potential in any field. What kind of advice would you give someone who wants to do that?
I'll tell you what Ellen DeGeneres told me.
She doesn't have very good of a reputation anymore. But it might be good advice, though.
It's good advice. Good advice. Because here's what happened. Yeah, reputation. I mean, these things come and go.
They do.
Just like identities.
True.
Here's what happened. I went on vacation to Parrot Key, which is a place in Turks and Caicos. Really cool little island. And just so happened, it was a very secluded, like only small number of rooms, happened that the day before we left was the Academy Awards, right? When it was still kind of a thing, right? No, it's not really a thing anymore. It's becoming such a joke.
Yeah.
But, and she was the MC for the Academy Awards that year. So I was like, wow, she did a really good job. Did a really good job. So here I am, like, and she was on Oprah the next morning, and then we went the next day, right? The next morning. So we land in a place called British Virgin Islands, right? And then you go from there to Turks and Caicos, and you have to take this boat. So we end up on this boat, and lo and behold, who's on the boat with us? Ellen DeGeneres. She just did the Academy Awards. She just did a day of like, you know, her like media circuit, you know, sort of like the victory lap after a successful Academy Awards as MC. And Billy Crystal had done it so many times. You know, all these famous comedians and stuff had done it, but she did a great job. Managed to get through it without pissing off the entire world, right? And so she's on the boat with us, going to this resort that not many people are on, right? And Bruce Willis is on this island too, and Keith Richards. It was interesting people. It was a fascinating trip. I remember this, but I remember asking her, I'm like, wow, you did an amazing job on, you know, the whole Academy Awards thing. I said, did you have a plan for this your whole life? How did you manifest this? Because I was fascinated to know how she did it. I mean, that in that field, that's the pinnacle. I mean, even today, it's still a pinnacle. I remember when Hugh Jackman did it, I was like, damn, he did a great job. But the thing is, she said something really interesting. She said, you know, since I was 8 years old, I saw myself doing the Academy Awards as MC. And she said, and every time I would play in my dollhouse, I'd set up this little stage like Man's Chinese Theater and everything. I have me on the stage. And she goes, and then I would have this recurring nightmare fear that would happen both in dreams and while I was playing with it, that I would get on the stage and I would forget all my lines and I wouldn't know what to say. And it was like the most awkward experience ever. She goes, but I kept always keeping it in my mind that one day I want to do this. I have to do this. I have to do this. And she said, so I decided to flip the script a little bit. She goes, I realized that I needed to not think about getting on the stage and forgetting my lines. I needed to instead feel what it felt like the next morning when I read the headlines of how successful it was. Right? And every time you take in a deep breath like that, that's something deep to your subconscious telling you, take that in. That's why you take the deep breath. So she said this to me. It was pretty profound. And I remember thinking, because she didn't want to just get to the stage, get the job, and then screw it up. She wanted to actually succeed at it. So her focus from that point forward was to read the headlines and what the headlines said. And all the headlines were really positive the time that she did that. And keeping that mental discipline and recognizing that it's not the logos, but it's the pathos that actually brings it to you. It's the feeling inside of you and embodying that feeling. I'll give you another example. I used to buy watches all the time. So this is a watch. I like unique watches, right? It's kind of a unique watch, right? It tells time differently and everything. It's got kind of a whole different approach to how it tells time, right? Mm-hmm. It's based on a 60 thing here, and it doesn't go all the way around. It kind of goes, it's called a minute repeater, it like jumps backwards. Got it. So I used to collect watches. I probably had more than 150 watches at one stage. I stopped doing it now. But the reason I had so many watches is because I used it as a totem. You've seen Inception. Yeah. Right? So what I would do, the spin the top, right? Yeah. What I would do is, let's say I woke up in Shanghai one day with my daughter. I was there for 2 weeks with her when she was 18. I was like a daddy-daughter trip. And we went to Japan, where I used to live. And we went to South Korea, and I wanted to take her across China. We went to Beijing and we went to Shanghai. So while we were in Shanghai, I woke up one morning and I felt bad for being away from the office because I knew it was a critical time at work. And I was like feeling anxiety because I had just started my company. It became in 2 years a unicorn company. And so I was like, but before it became unicorn, because we had to get outside investors to come in that were like major, venture capital funds, I had this anxiety that like, my gosh, if I got to figure out how to maintain this company because it was burning through a lot, as most unicorns do, they burn through a lot of cash. They find a big opportunity that people are willing to bet behind, but they end up burning through a lot of cash to get to that stage and beyond. Yeah. So we were at that stage where I think we were burning probably like $5 million a month or something like that. So it's a lot. And interestingly, so I had this anxiety. I'm like, I'm going to run out of money. Oh my God, what's going to happen? And I'm going to be screwed. And this is going to, I'm going to lose it all. Right. So I wake up with this anxiety from this dream. And I grab my daughter. I say, look, sweetheart, we're going to go to the Bulgari store over in the shopping center over there at this Shanghai mall. And she's like, why? She goes, you said everything's even more expensive here than the US. I said, I don't care. We're going to go over to that place. So I said, I have to buy a watch. And she said, why? You have so many watches already. I said, I have to buy a watch. So I go to buy this watch that I wanted, which was a watch, not this one, but a similar one, another Bulgari one, which was a Octo Reserve minute repeater type thing. It was a really pretty watch. I'd been looking at it and thinking, I want to have that watch. I want to have that watch. And the reason I bought the watch, it was expensive too. It had to be expensive enough because if this didn't work out, it needed to sting. So you've probably heard the story of Cortez. Cortez comes to the coast of Mexico. He's got 300 men with him. They've got 6 ships. The men go into the forest to go relieve themselves. They look back at the beach and they see all their ships on fire. And Cortez is like, yeah, I burned the ships. You know why? There's 300 of us. There's 3 million of these Aztecs, and they've got all the gold. Right? Now, obviously, it was an entirely reprehensible thing to do as a conquistador, right? But that's what he thought his mission was. And certainly not something to be bragging about, for sure. But no one can deny that either they had providence or luck or something to be able to pull that off. But a core aspect of it in his own memoirs was he burned the ships because he didn't want his men to feel they had any other options. Right?
That one's getting in right now.
We either
I know what you're saying.
We either go and make it happen, or we're just going to die. Right? It's that simple.
Or you run out of money or whatever.
Or you run out of money or whatever it is. So the reason I bought watches like that is because most people practice some delayed gratification. They would buy themselves a watch after they present the challenge. They succeed in overcoming the challenge, right? Or the obstacle, whatever it may be. And then they have a celebration for themselves. And then they feel really good. And for those people that have been like hyper overachievers in their lifetimes, they'll realize that moment, literally moment, is so short that you feel satisfied. Because that in itself is kind of a drug. But the more you experience it, the more you have to take bigger risks, the more you have to take, more difficult challenges to get that same high from achieving, right? And I was one of those overachiever types. The reason I would buy the watch is I flipped the script. Like, how do I burn the ships? There's no going back. There's no ships coming to Mexico, but for a year. We got 1 year to make this work. We're all going to die. So my philosophy was every time I looked at my watch, I remembered celebrating achieving the task that I wanted to achieve. So I was celebrating and feeling that celebration every time I looked at my watch. That was a totem as a reminder. So until the day that I achieved that thing, I would only wear that watch. Because every time, and this is back before we had iPhones, we had iPhones, but they weren't being used as like clocks back then. Now they've become a more efficient clock than this, right? Because you're literally tied to it all the time. But I would look at my watch. Every time I look at my watch, I'd be like, oh, cool watch. And I'm like, yeah, congratulations, Archie. You achieved this big challenge. You got the big VC investment at the 700 million pre-money valuation. And I played that over in my head over and over and over and over. And I associated it with the emotion of that success. And every single time it worked.
So it's about being in the end already emotionally.
It is embodying the achievement and the feeling, and that feeling of success and happiness and abundance before you would actually face the task.
Do you see that as a universal law?
Yes. Yes. It is absolutely, our thoughts, our words, and our actions are inextricably linked together. So our thoughts become our words, and our words, you could say our thoughts become our judgments become our words. Our words, and that's how we interpolate society at large, or how we interpret the universal experience that we're going through. Maybe it doesn't even exist until we observe it. Maybe there's no such thing as time anyway in the first place. And then what we then have as actions become our habits. And those habits become directly associated with our karmic cycles. And what is karma anyway? The definition of karma is just destiny. But what if what we call destiny is actually just the free will of the higher self? What if it's what you chose all along? That means then karma's choice. Ooh. It means there's really no mistakes. It means there's only learnings. And the opportunity to peel back that onion and understand another depth, we're plunging the depths of ourselves. And as we understand ourselves, we go deeper and deeper within and learn acceptance and love, then that extends to the whole world around us. Because as we love ourselves, we tend to judge the world around us based on what we crave.
As above, so below.
Yes. It's as above, so below. So that is a correspondence principle, right, of Hermeticism. So I started noticing all these mental aspects of the universe, but I thought I was just like this manifestation Jedi type of thing because I was good at it. And I could always see the future. I could always predict trends. I could always see when things were going to happen. But sometimes people would think I was crazy a little bit, maybe a lot, because I would take big risks. Right? But I was always grounded. I'm a Taurus, so I could manifest stuff. And so, the difference between like a crazy old man and a charming older gentleman to society.
You told me this on the phone one time. I remember, I think.
A few $1 million.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, that is the way
true.
society.
It's so true. That's how people perceive. If you have no money and you're saying the spiritual path, people aren't going to take you seriously. Then if you have
if
money,
you're Elon Musk, you're saying we live in a simulation. He's like, the guy's a genius, man. What the F? And then, but if you're like some
just
dude
normal,
who has no money, who's on the side of the street, who's like bumming for dough, then it's like, that guy's crazy, man. He's lost it. What the F? But he's saying the exact same thing. He's not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
This is the way we look at the world. It's our own conditioning biases. It's like, yeah, you can be crazy as long as you can pay the bills, bro. Right? That's the way we exist in this world. So I hope, though, that you take what I just said because it works. But then I realized, okay, because then I was like so into this. I'm like, how many other things can I manifest, man? Because I can manifest this stuff. I just got to, and it takes a lot of discipline to rid your mind of negative self-narratives. That's the hardest part. I got asked yesterday in a podcast I did at the LA Blockchain Conference. They're like, okay, if you could send a push message to the whole world, what would it say? And I said, free your mind from all of your negative self-narratives and have the courage to be the change you want to see in the world. It's just that simple.
So then on that note, do you see a difference when you say free? I'm really interested in this concept because there seems to be a polarization of people that we're going free versus it's there, but we aren't listening. You know what I'm saying? There's like a really subtle.
So what do you mean by that?
Is it ever going to go away? Are the thoughts ever going to go away? Does that make sense? Because I've seen, here's an example. I've seen people say, you don't need to clear your mind. You just need to stop feeding the negativity because when you stop feeding it, it will go away by itself or it won't mean anything. So do you still have those thoughts that come up? And do you think it's more of like the subconscious after enough, you've done this for a long time. So is it after enough time, those subconscious thoughts, the subconscious thoughts that are manifested from the feelings that you used to consistently feel, do they just basically subside? Or how do you see that process? Because I think that's a really important.
I think for me, first of all, I wasn't even aware that I was, because I've always been a pretty positive person. I wake up in the morning happy. Like every day I'm happy. Even last night, I didn't get much sleep at all because my kids were up all night because they're not feeling well. And it was kind of a difficult night. But I still woke up like, hi. I'm always happy in the morning. And it's like confounding to even the people that I've lived with. They're like, why are you always in a good mood? That's so irritating, man. Like, what the hell? I'm like,
they think you're being fake or something.
I think I'm being fake. Yeah, but I'm not being fake. It's legit. It's real. I just have, some people have that disposition, I think. So I
come to that point.
I wasn't even aware that I had negative self-narratives. Do you know how I identified that I had them? Through my judgments of other people. My judgments of other people were the tell. I'll give you an example. I used to stand watching Donald Trump. Like the dude drove me insane. And I'm like,
the antics?
Not because a little bit of the antics, yes, and the bluster and all that stuff, but not actually even those things as much. What it really was his policy. A lot of them were not bad, but the way he communicated them were horrible because of the antics and the bluster and all of that other stuff. And so I would be like, oh, why does he do this? Why can't he just like listen a little bit more? It doesn't have to always be about him. But then I realized, wait a minute. Anyone who calls out the ego of another person is only suffering from ego separation themselves. It's not the humble person that looks at Donald Trump and says, you're an egomaniac. I know plenty of people that are they believe they're so humble that they become arrogant in their humility. Do you know people like that?
100%.
Oh, absolutely.
100%.
So then I had to stop myself and say, I'm judging Donald Trump, maybe because I crave some of the ways that he is acting and being. Maybe I have characteristics. Maybe I'm just looking at a reflection of myself. So I forced myself, whenever I started to judge him, to stop myself and say out loud, I am that I am. And everybody would be like, what the hell is it? Because I'd be in the middle of a conversation. I'd like stop myself. I'm like, no. And I'm like, I am that I am. And it was like a punishment in a way, but it caused me to stop mid-sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And I really stuck to that. And I started noticing it made a difference. It made a big difference because I started thinking, wait, all these things that I'm judging in other people are actually just the things I don't like about myself. I am that I am. Yikes. What that did, though, is it started to trigger this conscious realization of the subconscious negative narrative that was going on. And by realizing that, I then thought, okay, I must have negative narrative going on, but I'm not even conscious that I'm having the negative narrative. So now I know that I have negative narrative because it's somewhere it has to, thoughts precede the words. The thoughts precede the judgments precede the words. So I started thinking, okay, I just need to continue to practice this and start instead to practice acceptance. And it caused me also to analyze myself and say, what in me, if I'm triggered on something, what in me is so bothered by how another person is acting or being? Is there a larger message? And is that larger message something from my higher self? Why, when I have a failure or a bad outcome or a disappointment or a heartbreak, did I have to experience it? What was the reason for what I chose? No longer separating myself from that decision, no longer applying someone else or me as a victim to that circumstance, but rather looking at it and saying, I played an active role in this. I just need to now connect with that part of my personage, part of my overall self, the higher self, that determined that this was the very best thing for my highest and best result. So that changed everything. Because as soon as I started thinking like that, then it was like, and that happened at the same time I started realizing that facts aren't really facts, they're just facets of a larger prism of a whole truth. And in order to understand and see it in the mind of God, the universe, you have to be able to see the sum of all facets. So how do I expand my awareness to be able to see the sum of all facets as best as I can? Because I never will be able to do it, but we can achieve varying degrees of it. And that was where geometry came in. Because geometry is all about expanding your perception, expanding your perspectives. It's like we call it angels, but actually it's angles. And angles of perspective. Saul Alinsky said, our world is not a world of angels. Rather, it is a world of angles. A world where men speak of moral principle, yet act on power principle. A world where we are always moral and our enemies are always immoral. And I remember reading that in this book called The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene and thinking, gosh, is that true? Is whatever that I believe consciously and subconsciously that will benefit my conscious mind what I will choose as the only ethical choice? Is there no objectivity to ethics? It was a hard one. It was a really hard one to grasp because what it forced me then to do is to realize all the bullshit I've been telling myself. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not all these people trying to hold us down, all this stuff. When you realize the universe is mental, there's no one to look at but yourself. So truly awakened people aren't judgmental. The ones that are woke and tossing out judgments like mad, they're just at earlier stages of their awakening process.
And how do you think we can set boundaries with that without judgment? Or do you think it's necessary? Because then you come to this process of if the world is just what it is and it's just us in this mental universe, then do we want to facilitate change in the world? Do we want to, that's the age-old question, Then you have the masters who decided, they're just going to radiate in that self-realization you call God consciousness. So where do you think the balance is between that?
The only things that the masters have taught is the illusion of it all.
Mm-hmm.
That's the consistent thread. Because if you try to judge something, then you easily fall into the syndrome that I call the hammer and nail syndrome. A hammer seeks a nail. Whatever it is that is your pet project, I'm all for, for stopping deforestation, right, in Brazil. So you can apply all of your effort and work to this, and you'll make some improvements. But in the world around you, in the parts that you can't yourself touch, you'll only find that same thing replicating itself over and over and over again. It'll become a worldwide pandemic of deforestation. You'll never actually be able to solve it. Because you have to first realize the universe is mental. Take the concept of materiality out of your mind altogether and realize that there's nobody else here that's destroying the rainforest but you. It's you. And so you're creating an opposer within. And then the more opposition you apply to that activity, the more opposition you'll face. You create your own inertia, your own pushback, your own challenge, your own difficulty, until you finally surrender and release and say, I want to be the change I hope to see in the world. So that change is accomplished through acceptance. We're not here in this construct of extreme judgment and scarcity and lack of abundance and all these things to learn more judgment, scarcity, lack of abundance, and shame. We're here to learn to transcend those things. We're here to learn how to love. We're here to learn how to love ourselves and how to love everybody else. And through loving ourselves completely, we will love everybody else. And then by that activity and truly feeling it within, the world will start to transform around you. All of a sudden, there won't be as much deforestation. The things that we apply our force against are the things that will only butt up against us more. Can you break for a second? Yes. Come in. Hi. Yeah, I will. Like 5 more minutes. Yeah, just tell them I'll be on in 5 more minutes. Okay. Okay. All right. No problem.
Is that the Math Magicians?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is it that time?
Yeah, it's that time.
Okay.
So we'll
wrap up.
We can probably we could also do it right after, I think. Yeah, I've got some time right after from 4 to 4:30, so we could do it then. No, I'm glad you got to be here for that. That was like, whoa. Yeah, we've been trying to solve that forever, man.
You're just discovering the secrets of the universe, and I just happen to be present. I'm here for it.
And how cool it is that it actually played out. Exactly. Here I am trying to show the grid of space-time and how the grid works and how it's basically this harmonic of 3 and 2, because perfect fifth is 3 over 2. The major third is the cubed root of 2. Another way to look at 3 over 2. So it's all 3 and 2, 3 separation, and then, binary within each of those cubes. And then it gets represented exactly like that inside the freaking Enochian tables. What in the actual, and then I'm just like randomly going, oh yeah, speed of light is the number of the people in the encampment of Judah. I got to find this. And I'm like searching for it, I finally find it. And then that is the cipher to the Enochian tables.
Yeah, so for to catch everyone up, basically, I just watched him uncover, I think, at least a very old encryption in the Bible that is referring to many of the scientific discoveries, specifically with numbers.
And light
with
speed.
The math, with the light speed. And there was other ones too, but it's as though these, and you said it was who you thought, who did you think it was that encrypted that?
So the King James Version of the Bible was actually written by a group of people that also had another code name that they wrote under called Shakespeare. And those people included a group of the following individuals. Now, I'm not sure John Dee, because John Dee was already dead, but because the King James Bible was finished in 1611. But Shakespeare was, at the time, a group of people which included Sir Francis Bacon, Edward de Vere, Kit Marlowe, and John Dee, right? And John Dee was famous for being the Queen's mathematician and astrologer. And John Dee channeled, along with Edward Kelly, a guy that he worked with while living in Prague, the Enochian tables. So the Enochian tables in Enoch is another name for Thoth. Okay, so Hermes, Trismegistus.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been trying to crack and find the cipher for the Enochian tables, and we actually found it today inside Numbers chapter 2, which is kind of super epic.
Yeah.
Because it literally unraveled right in front of us as we're doing it. Like, we're all like, wait, I see this, I see this. It was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. I couldn't believe it.
That's incredible. And who knows how more there is, but, you know, there's a whole nother conversation about who was Hermes and Thoth and all of these ancient figures and how they might be just the same being, you know, reincarnated. Or maybe they're not. Maybe they're just all accessing the same truth from different points. We talked about earlier Interstellar and encrypting things through time.
Yeah.
And it's almost like that. Maybe that's what that was.
I think it was.
Yeah.
I think it definitely was.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to lie, it was freaky, but fun at the same time, because we've decrypted a lot of things before as a group. You know, we're referencing this group that we have as a research team of physicists and mathematicians, but also people that are mystics and esotericists. So they happen to be afoot in both realms, right? So we can go toe to toe with the top mathematicians and physicists in the world, but also we understand the esoteric meanings behind things, because we know that the universe is mental. And when you realize it's mental, then so much can become available to you, and it's instantaneous because it's a reflection of your own feelings inside of you. And then as you express those authentic feelings within inside of you, and you're no longer afraid to express them to the outer world, then the reflection back is instantaneous. It can be instantaneous.
Yeah.
And I'm experiencing that more and more every day. And meeting people like yourself and how it's transforming my life. And it's almost like the more I love the world around me, the more the world, and take risks as well, because it's not like, before I had to separate my life into different buckets, right? I was like businessman, and so I'd have a talk track of what I'd say as a businessman. I'd have a talk track for what I'd say as a math guy, and I'd have a talk track for what I'd say in physics. I'd have a talk track for what I'd say in a healthcare environment or a fintech environment or whatever environment. Now, in the last 2 years, I've really been deliberate about integrating all of those into one integrated discussion, and not worrying anymore about trying to cater to different audiences, but just rather focus on being authentic.
That's what I'm trying to do. Because I don't have a specific category. What are you talking about on the podcast? It's a bunch of different stuff. It's not all just, that's why I don't curate these conversations in a specific direction, because I think it's all connected. And if you start to try and put yourself into a box of, I need to talk this way or be this type of person, you're missing out on all these other aspects of you. And I feel like combining them all into one being is like, that's where the most power is.
Yeah.
You know? So
Totally right.
But I think that'll do it.
Thank you so much, Nick. We're going to do this again for sure.
Yes. Thank you for coming on.
If you want to join us at another point in time for what you just witnessed, let me know and I'll arrange it.
For sure. For sure. And where can people find you?
Robert Edward Grant on Instagram, robertedwardgrant.com on my website, but I'm on every social media platform. And also I have a book called Philomath.
Right, I'm grabbing it. Check out Philomath. He was kind enough, got the signed copy. Let's go. This is a great book. I already have it on online, but to have it in person, it's really nice. The hardcover. I don't have a hardcover for my book. I'm sure there's plenty of math.
There is.
To go around in here.
But it's all new.
Yeah.
That's the thing. If you read it also, you don't have to have a huge in-depth knowledge of mathematics.
Yeah.
There's no algebra. There's very, very little algebra in it. So don't worry.
Hey,
Because
hey,
by
that's
the
fine.
way,
By the way, I gotta say, I'm better at algebra. I did really well in the college algebra. High school, not great. But then I actually started trying.
this is predominantly geometric.
Okay.
Which the visualization of geometry is what makes it easier to comprehend.
Yeah.
So we like to put everything in wave and geometric form.
Yeah. And you've got plenty of diagrams in here. I mean, got everything in here. So check out the book if you're interested in that, and also just knowing more about the nature of reality, because it really seems throughout that meeting and everything, it's geometric.
And check out my TV show Code X on Gaia and on Amazon Prime. See you guys.
All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Universe the Game, and if you did, consider subscribing and sticking around for many more fascinating episodes just like this one. All right, and check out today's sponsor, my book, 10 Secrets of Awakening, The Secrets to Understanding Consciousness, Life Transformation, and Self-Realization. If you're interested in those topics and improving your life, I would recommend checking out the book as well. Other than that, we will see you on the next episode. We've got plenty more, so take a look around here, and I'm sure you'll find an episode that you're interested in. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Until then, peace.